Hello, welcome to my video on reallocating the types of Gen 1 Pokemon. Let's start off by talking about what this is. I am going to be changing the types of Pokemon with their current aesthetic designs and only using the most minimal first gen lore as possible. And I am trying to diversify the roster with these types. This isn't talking about stats, it isn't rebalancing the type chart, we're not redesigning gyms, redoing wild encounters, or adding any new Pokemon. We are purely working with the original 151 Pokemon and trying to give them a little bit more flavor with their types. Now, why? Well, first of all, I want to say that type is not everything. There are many factors that make a Pokemon great or bad. However, types are the easiest information to get about a Pokemon. When Pokemon have the same type, it makes people not want to use one over the other. It also gives gym leaders more interesting teams when they have more choices of their specific type that they want. And Game Freak, even in the modern day, still doubles up on types sometimes in the same generation, but they do tend to keep things mostly unique now. They then undercut this by not taking into account which returning Pokemon would also be in that generation, causing situations where that uniqueness of type is ruined by the fact that you can just catch Pikachu again. And in the Pokemon series, there are still 7 unused type combinations, and several type combinations that are only used by legendaries or other incredibly hard to catch Pokemon. Let's start by talking about each type individually. On the left of these slides will be an original number of fully evolved Pokemon from Gen 1 of that type. On the right is going to be the new total, and underneath is the number of special cases. I will explain the special cases in intermissions as we get closer to them, but suffice it to say they're Pokemon that are okay with overlapping with others, or in some way don't really count towards their total. Let's start with the normal type. So what makes a Pokemon normal? A rat is pretty normal, a pigeon is normal, apparently a sentient blob with eyes is normal, an egg monster that is a health professional is normal. We might need to work on that, Game Freak. But what I'm saying here is that normal means that it is normal to see that Pokemon with people or in an urban environment. Grass. Grass is grass. And also a bunch of other plants. Also fungus for some reason. And fungus are not plants. Other than the above strangeness, grass is pretty straightforward. If it's in the kingdom Plantae or fungi, it goes into grass type. The description works very well. 6 originally, 6 now. Water, the most common final type in the game. Water in the original game meant vaguely aquatic, and there are quite a few aquatic Pokemon. I mean, look at all the routes that are water routes. And I do find that a 100% water environment is rather detrimental to most species' continued survival. But I think that water on so many Pokemon lowers water's unique value as its own type. So I am going to try and cut down on the amount of water Pokemon. Fire. The red-orange type is not one that you find in nature other than fire beetles and volcanic snails. So the game designers made fire Pokemon instead of making Pokemon that are fire type. It's a subtle difference, but it is a big one. And because of that, it means that fire type is mostly made up out of pure fire and fire flying in Gen 1. Now, in order to give fire a uniqueness and the ability to be applied to other Pokemon, I've decided to make it the first of what I am calling the Friendship Trio. Fire is going to mean that this Pokemon is extroverted and full of energy. It's ready to adventure and cause a little bit of trouble. Bug. Similar to grass, this is the type for all of the bugs. It had just enough members for a full team of 6, with members ranging from early game fodder to some solid late game options. Again, like grass, the types are just very well applied to bugs. Not a lot for me to do. Flying. Flying creatures apparently include Doduo and Gyarados. One of those made sense when it was still bird type, and the other one gets even weirder as bird type. So flying does include many Pokemon that do fly, but also every bird, no matter the design, just gets flying for free, no matter the logic. And now when I'm evaluating if a type should get flying, I'm looking to see if it actually can fly, or do some other amazing aerial feats. Fighting. Fighting type in the games feels kinda like a joke. Like Bruno, the champion of fighting, only uses 3, and the fighting dojo is constantly trying to fight the psychic gym in Gen 1. It doesn't help that 4 of the 5 fighting type Pokemon are just mono fighting. This type is originally applied to Pokemon that were masters of a real fighting form or just had huge hands. So for this, I'm going to make fighting more of a strive to be the strongest, or that they're just defending their territory in the wild. And that has doubled the type's members. Water, one of the most common types in the entire game. And it does make sense since there are several areas in the game that are made entirely out of water. And an all-water environment is rather detrimental to most things that aren't fish. This meant that most of the water types felt rather wrong to remove the type from, but I did remove it from quite a few because if we don't make water at least slightly more unique, it's just going to get drowned out. Fuck you. Rock is a type that is very weak to the early game water and grass type, which gives a lot of players a very poor first impression of it, which is very warranted. It is not a great type, and it's the type of the first gym leader and Bruno. It's a joke. Now, half the type is made up of literal rocks, and the other half are fossils. The theme here is pretty clear, but they're rather limiting if we want to make rock interesting as a type, and the fossil Pokemon interesting as Pokemon. So rock is going to move away from literally made of rocks, and become a type for the strong natural defenses. Steel. This is not a Gen 1 type, but I'm using it. Now, it was made to counter psychics and defend against a bunch of other staples of Pokemon. So only one Pokemon in Gen 1 became Steel, so we don't have many examples to use to see what makes Steel Steel. So I'm going to relate it back to Ground and Rock. If Ground was the strategy of hiding, Rock is the strategy of defending, then Steel will be the strategy of being offensive, going on the attack. Poison. Kanto is full of poison Pokemon. It is more common than bugs, grass, and ice, and is one of the most common types in the game. This is a hellscape of a land full of poison. Now, such a prevalent type means that it's got a broad spectrum of different Pokemon, from 3 different plants to a snake to just a blob of toxic goo. But Pokemon can get poison type and be fine. I think that the existence of the sludge Pokemon sets a pretty high bar for what should count as poison. So unless something is very clearly poison, it is probably going to be losing poison. Fairy, the newest type in Pokemon. It managed to pull 3 Gen 1s into its orbit. Unfortunately for Fairy, one of them's the Mime. Of these 3, it feels like they were grabbed almost at random, though. with 2 of them being Mount Moon staples and the third being a random psychic Pokemon. There were definitely more options of Pokemon that I think it could have fit far better. But to help clarify Fairy as a type on its own, I'm going to make it the dedicated magic type. And there are a few magical Pokemon. Electric. Much like fire, this type is made up of pure electrics and only one electric flying. Also, like fire, there aren't really electric animals other than the eel. So this type feels more like they were making electric Pokemon instead of making Pokemon that are electric. So, just like fire, this is a member of the friendship trio. Electric types are a little bit shy and very self-conscious, but these Pokemon can be very hard to start a relationship with. But after some time, they will latch onto you and form some deep bonds. Rock type is weak to the very basic water and grass types, which gives most players a very poor impression of the type. Sorry, wrong script. Ground type is weak to the very basic water and grass types, which gives most players a poor impression of the type. Of course, the truth is that ground is an amazing type, but one that is thematically difficult to parse from rock. Ground being dirt is rather easy to see from Diglett and Sandshrew, but for some reason it's also on Rhyhorn and the Nidos, but only their final stages. So I decided that ground should mean burrow, which removes some of the Pokemon already in ground, but opens it up to many new Pokemon. Now, necromancy isn't just real in Pokemon. Children are made to harvest the souls of the dead to have them fight one another. I know I'm not the first one to point this out, but that's horrifying. And there is only one ghost line in Kanto. It is very ghost. I admire the restraint of Game Freak to not put ghost on so many other things, and I'm going to see if I can try and emulate that. Oh no, I think I've made a mistake. Well, the largest increase in lines is caused by the fact that I have made a basic reinterpretation of ghost type to make it slightly less creepy. Instead of them being the dead brought back to life, instead, these are going to be Pokemon that were created by human actions. Technically, this is just water type, since ice is just frozen water. But pedantics aside, ice type does have a few members. Discounting the legendary bird and looking at the 4 remaining ones, we can see the through line for all these ice types. It's a type for yokai, seals, and clams. Now, in order to make ice a little bit more interesting, and the ability to be put onto more Pokemon, I'm going to make ice the third and final member of the friendship trio. Now, ice friends are going to be slow and chill. They love to nap and relax with their favorite friends. And while they might be glacial, if you get them started, you'll be in for an avalanche. Psychic. Growing up, I remember in the early games always trying to get an Abra, because if they're so hard to catch, they must be good. And then Abra only have teleport. That made me know that they were hiding something powerful in Abra. I was a very smart child. Unfortunately, I became a very dumb and socially poorly adjusted adult. Psychic was the best type in Gen 1, and the creators knew that. That's why they gave Psychic to the creator of all Pokemon, and the biologically enhanced clone of the progenitor of all Pokemon. The problem is that magic was often applied as a psychic thing, but fairy is now the magic type. So psychic has to be narrowed down quite a bit to adjust it to purely mental powers. Aw man, there's so much dark in Gen 1, you can't even find it. Now, nothing was retroactively made dark when it was introduced in Gen 2. I assume it was an intentional design choice of Game Freak, and not them just being too lazy to change more Pokemon. And I see dark as a type to be a state of mind to contrast with fighting. Whereas fighting wants to be the strongest and prove that it's the best, dark is willing to use any tactic it can, any move if it means victory. Dragon. This is the final and rarest type that is in Gen 1 Pokemon. It is meant to be powerful and rare beyond measure. The only line of dragons in the game is a dragon. You have to be a dragon to be a dragon in Gen 1. You can't even be a sea serpent and be a dragon. It's dragon o'clock, baby. And what does dragon o'clock mean? It means it's time for dragons. And I want to try and preserve this dragon methodology as best I can, only putting dragon on Pokemon that are truly mighty enough to earn that right. Now, let's get into the Pokemon. The starters. Now, for the starters, I sort of saw it as there being two options for them. We can either make them all one type, or we can make them all dual types. Giving them all dual typing would work, and we'd only have to change Blastoise. And I could easily see Blastoise being Steel for its cannon, or Rock for its shell. But I wanted to go for Mono for all three of them. It makes the game more balanced, and it turns each of the starters into the real representatives of their type. You have to remember that this is, as far as the first generation goes, the only starter Pokemon. These have to be the best grass type, the best fire type, the best water type. These are your friends for your entire adventure. Alright, let's look at some of these early game bugs. Specifically, Kakuna and Metapod. Did I need to change their types? No, but I'm going to anyways. So I want to make both of these Cocoons into part rock-type Pokemon. I think that it really reinforces that these bugs are supposed to take a hit, that they are hardened, that your tackles aren't going to do anything to them, that they are tough, and they won't crack until the Pokemon inside decides to burst out. I mostly did this because I thought it was funny, and I hope you find it funny too. Butterfree and Beedrill. Butterfree is a bug-flying Pokemon that flies on its butterfly wings. Perfectly bug-flying. Beedrill, however, is a bug with drills made out of poison, I guess. Now, the Pokedex makes a pretty big deal about how they're territorial, and bees are known to people to defend their hives, so I decided to make Beedrill a fighting type. The other option was Steel for Beedrill, but I think that the aggressive nature of wasps is done to protect the hive, not so much as to chase people down maliciously. That you run away from a Beedrill, it's fine. It's just defending itself. Alright, and the Pidgey line. We have Pidgey, a normal bird. Pidgeotto, a bigger normal bird. And then we have Pidgeot. A Pidgeot is so big that I think that it loses the normal type. It has grown too big, too powerful to become the full monotype bird. And it is an exemplar of the flying type. It will be the flying type champion. Alright, and now it's rat time. Alright, buddies, it's rat o'clock. I'm just keeping them as normal. I mean, I did think about poison to be the plague, but nothing about these guys says plague. If I was adding more Pokemon, I would definitely give Raticate an evolution. Make that poison. Spearow and Fearow. Spearow, just a normal bird. Let it stay. But Fearow is a huge bird with a massive beak. And for me, it's either dark or steel type. So its name is Fearow, and that would fit with dark if it used psychological warfare or other tactics to scare its prey. But is it really doing that? Steel, however, does work, because it's got a huge beak on its face. It's got big talons. It's very aggressive. It'll swoop down and it'll peck your frickin' head off. Steel is perfect. Ekans and Arbok. They are two snakes that both are and aren't constrictor snakes. Now, pure poison was just out of the question. Snakes aren't just poisonous ropes. Plenty of them are strangulation ropes. I did think about giving them normal typing. They are normal snakes, but if normal is normal for people to see, that paints a pretty bad picture of Kanto. Now, I did think about dark for Arbok's hood and the grim nature about such a predator, but the hood itself feels like more of a defensive technique. It's just trying to make itself look bigger to scare off a predator. Alternatively, ground is amazing here, because snakes live in burrows. They hide in sand or crags to get their prey, especially cobras and rattlesnakes. Brief intermission now to talk about the elemental stones. When a person uses an elemental stone, it should feel impactful. Really give the Pokemon a big change, just so that you're using some really powerful radioactive rocks to fundamentally change your Pokemon. So these stones have to at least change or add a type to the Pokemon that it is evolving. And with that rule moving forward, let's see who's next. Oh, it's Pikachu! Oh boy. Lacey, Pikachu's just kind of a dormouse that chews on electric cables, but it evolves with a Thunderstone. So keeping it as electric would mean that Raichu would need a new type, but I don't think any new type fits with Raichu. However, Pikachu being normal would show that this is just an ordinary mouse. It's technically no better than a Rattata. Raichu, however, is going to gain that electric type, but it's also going to keep its normal type. That way it can really display that it is still a normal mouse at the end of the day, but it is now electric. Oh, Sandshrew and Sandslash. They're cute little guys. I mean, Sandshrew is just a burrowing mammal that eats grubs. It can stay ground type. But Sandslash has knives for hands and... oh boy. Yeah, it's going to need a new type. Normal might work for Sandshrew. I mean, it's just a shrew. It's not common in most places, but it's not that weird. Sandslash, though, is definitely not normal. I mean, Dark could be argued. Leaping out of holes and attacking people was what it did, but I don't see it. Steel, now. Steel does seem like it might fit. I mean, look at its claws. It can cut right through rock with those. Defend its home. Great weapons. Alright. Now for 4 identical-ish Pokemon that were all monotype poison. Now, the Nidos are very odd. Nothing about them really looks like poison to me. I mean, only the male line has a horn, which is apparently what's poisonous about it. But the female line doesn't have a horn. I have no idea how those are supposed to be giving out their poison. So instead, I'm just changing them to ground type. These are fundamentally still the children and teenagers of this species. They're still hiding mostly and live within their parents' territories. Now for the king and queen, who are definitely not still growing. Now, it's pretty easy to argue for them to have the same type, but I wanted to go with different types because this is my video and I can do what I want. Don't fight me. Please don't. I'm very scared. Now, Nidoking, I wanted to make a fighting type. It's the one who's constantly fighting for territory and, the dominance of its pride, as it were. Now, Nidoqueen, though, I thought it was more interesting to make it be psychic type. have it be a direct counter towards Nidoking. It's sort of the brains behind this pride, and it has the definitive ability to protect the kids from any overly aggressive rivals that might happen to come by. Clefairy and Clefable, the first of the 3 lines that were made fairy retroactively in later generations. Clefairy, I think I'm going to keep as fairy. It works pretty well for it. Clefable, though, needs a new type to be added since it evolves via a moonstone. Normal is not going to work for this. It's an alien fairy. Its wings can't fly. And I just don't think it quite fits with the ice-type friend theme, though it is close. Rock, though, I think is interesting. It evolves with a moonstone, and the Clefairies are shown to worship the giant rock that fell from space. So I think that it would be interesting to add in a little lore blurb. Say that this meteor that fell from space is thought of to be the world's largest Clefable. That it's like the progenitor of the entire species. Vulpix and Ninetales. Lovely. I mean, with Vulpix, Pure Fire is fine. I mean, it's a Fennec Fox best friend. It's great. Ninetales evolves with a Firestone. So we have to give it a little something. Psychic is probably the most common thing added to Ninetales, and it does work with the previous lore, but I'm trying to stay away from that. As much as I can, at least. Ghost would make sense for Kitsune, but Ghost type has a new definition, so it's not very viable. Fairy, however, that works pretty good, since Fairy is now the dedicated magic type. And Kitsune are definitely magic. Jigglypuff and Wigglytuff. Pokemon that are only cared for by Masahiro Sakurai. Now, Jigglypuff is normal fairy as of Gen 6. I like it. It can stay. Wigglytuff, though, that evolves through a moonstone, so we need to make a change. Now, for Jiggly, we could just take away its fairy type and then give it to Wiggly, just like we did with Raichu. But I don't think that works. We give it fire for its fiery temper, but that's more of an anime thing. Rock would work like Clefable, but Jiggly and Wiggly aren't from space. Probably. What's interesting, though, is fighting type. Wigglytuff have tough in the name. They use Slap. They're very surprisingly aggressive Pokemon. So I think that it's an interesting combo. Oh, Zubat. It's just a little bat. Why is it poison? I mean, I'm thinking about other types for it. Bug would be neat, but it's not really much of a bug. Poison kind of works with the draining moves, but they're not poison-type moves. They're bug, mostly. Dark might even work also, but I mean, honestly, they're just blind little guys. They don't know any better. They're children. They're babies. Golbat, though, Golbat's old enough to know that it's playing foul. It's just drinking your blood because it can. So it is going to be taking that dark type. And the Vileplume line. Well, most of the Pokemon here can run with poison, but this is a stone evolution line. So instead, we're going to take Oddish and just take away its poison. And we're going to take Gloom and also remove its poison. Vileplume, though, it is a Rafflesia flower with legs. It smells like rotting meat. It is definitely capable of being poison. Just a quick note here. Gloom gets lips and then loses it. Why is that? And while I don't want to talk about other generations, Bellossom doesn't have Gloom's lips either. What happened to Gloom? Oh, look at Paris! Yes, he's a cute little guy. He's just a bug who collects mushrooms. Oh god, Parasect is horrifying. So I considered making it Ghost, but Ghost is for human intervention, and this is a natural process. Making Parasect pure grass would also show off that the bug is dead, but that's just a bit too morbid for me. The Venoline. Now, I did a little bit of research here because I was thinking I was going to be removing its poison. But no, these are based off of very real poisonous moths. These are poisonous bugs. They're straight up poison, and they stay as poison bugs. Okay, so Diglett. Diglett is pure ground. What else would they be? They're the perfect representation of ground type. They're Diglets. They dig. You can catch one in a Pokeball, and when it comes out of the Pokeball, it's still digging. Most other Pokemon aren't doing what they were doing when you caught them. It's just Diglett that's still digging. This is a committed Pokemon to digging. It's ground. Oh, Meowth and Persian. Now, Meowth is just a cat. Normal is fine. Persian is a Meowth who's grown up a bit. Now, Persian can keep its normal type. It's just a bigger cat. But I want to give it a second type, so as it doesn't become too similar to Rattata. Now, we could give it Steel. It has well-honed claws. But if claws are enough for Steel typing, we would have, 20 Steel types. Oh, Poisonous claws. No, nothing about this says poison. Dark, though. Dark is interesting, because cats are sadistic monsters. They bite me when they rub their cute bellies, and they have decided to grow fur that I am allergic to. Those cats know what they're doing, and they will pay for it with belly rubs. And now for the Ducks line. Weirdly enough, neither of these are water psychic. I know, in the original game, they were just pure water. Now, if we're going to be giving another type, we could look at Psychic, but I'm looking at Golduck, and it just seems too aggressive and not very Psychic-y. Plus, Psychic Water is already taken by a different Pokemon on this list. Fighting Water is also taken. Now, Fairy works well with the Kappa connection, since that is one of the major designs for Golduck. But Kappas aren't really known for magic. They're known more for sumo wrestling, which is fighting. But there's a different water fighting. So I think we're just going to have to keep these guys as mono water. I mean, Golduck is the bluest Pokemon, and honestly, it feels like the best swimmer of the generation. So, sorry guys, but you're sticking with water. Angry Monkey. Now, Mankey is a little monkey with a lot to prove. It's ready to throw down, but Primeape is rage and arms and fluff. This thing is so angry that mono fighting feels wrong because I feel like we're hiding the anger. Fire might be interesting, but as a friend type, it doesn't seem outgoing. It seems more like it is more of a murder going. So I'm going to go with Dark here. That this guy is just so angry that he's willing to fight and play dirty if it means that it wins. If it means that it gets to punch you in the face, it doesn't care how it goes about it. Alright, and now we're looking at some dogs here. Growlithe, Arcanine. We could do what we do with Raichu with these guys, but I'm deciding instead to do something a little bit different. So Growlithe is going to be made normal fire, because the fire friend type works great for hyper puppies. But when we give it the Firestone, which evolves into Arcanine, I'm going to make it a mono fire type. Get rid of the normal, because Arcanines are absolutely massive, and I don't care how big your Great Dane is, Arcanine is bigger. Arcanine is so much bigger. Oh, the Polly family. Now, Poliwag is just a little tadpole. It's got some legs. Water is fine. Poliwhirl, oh, she looks so happy. She's got little arms. She's ready to walk. Ah, great. Now Poliwrath, Poliwrath's going to punch you out. Just look at its eyes. It developed eyelids just to stare at you more menacingly. So I'm keeping them all the same type. Though I will admit that Poliwhirl, if I had to get rid of a Gen 1 Pokemon, I feel like Poliwhirl is basically the least anything of all the Pokemon in Gen 1. It's very middle. Now let's talk about trait evolutions. There are 4 trait evolutions in the original 151. In an opposite of the stones, I want these evolutions to be straight power-ups, turning each trait evolution into the pinnacle of their type, much like the starters are for their types. Now, this will make the act of finding a friend to trade with seem much more important, since these evolutions are so strong, while giving each of the 4 a clear identity when compared to the other 3 traded Pokemon. Kadabraline. It was already psychic. It was already one of the best types. Machamp. Already fighting. Not one of the best types, though. Oh, what a sad, sad state for fighting. It's Bell time. Now, Bellsprout is just a little pitcher plant, and Weepinbell is the bigger pitcher plant, and Victreebel is the biggest pitcher plant. And I have a problem with them. You see, acid isn't poison. Like, if you eat acid and you eat poison, you die, but they both kill you in very different ways. So I am removing the poison from all of them. And they also evolve with a leaf stone. So Victreebel needs a second type. So I was thinking about poison, but I just explained why that wouldn't work. And Ghost, super cool idea for Ghost. Like, it's using the souls of the creatures that it has eaten to power its own attacks. That's amazing. It's so cool. But it doesn't work with this version of Ghost that we're using. Dark, though. Dark is much more interesting, because it is the sign of just how evil this plant is. It draws you in with its scent to capture you and slowly consume you. Much like a real pitcher plant. The Tentas, both cool and cruel, are just jellyfish. Jellyfish don't have much brains. They just have tentacles. Tentacles that sting you with small poisonous barbs. So, the water poison type that they are in the original game? That's perfect. It's fine. Moving on. Geodude, Graveler, and Golem. Big rocks with faces. What luxury. Now, this is another trait evolution, so it needs to get rid of one of its 2 typings. We can either get rid of rock, or we can get rid of ground. Considering that Diglett is ground and Golem is a big rock, I'm going to go with rock. The Horsies, both Ponyta and Rapidash, and not Horsey. Now, these are both, in the original game, pure fire. And they don't evolve with a Firestone. So we could keep them pure fire if Arcanine didn't exist. And also if pure fire worked as well for this line. Now with Ponyta, it's going to keep fire, because as a friendship type, a horse works really well with that. Outgoing, energetic, ready to go on adventures. Perfect for a horse. But Rapidash, we want to show that it's growing up, so there's a few options we can take. We could do Fairy for how majestic they are, but I want to go with Fighting. Fighting shows that they are now very protective, that they're ready to, kick someone who is threatening their owner or their foals. Just really show that this is a horse that is ready for the world. Okay, and now we have Slowpoke and Bro. Now they're both water psychic types. But that doesn't feel quite right. So I think I want to go with the friendship type for them. Slow, lovable, always smiling. Let's go with ice. That way they can be ice cubes floating in the water. But let's make things a little bit different by holding off the psychic until it becomes a bro. That way, evolution means something. And while I'm not trying to take into account future generations, it does mean that we can give Slow King something special of its own. Alright, Magnemite and Magneton. The original steel types, kind of. Now, in the original gen, they're pure electric, gain steel. So with steel as being the weapon type, we have to ask ourselves, does Magneton and Magnemite have a weapon to justify steel typing? And I say yes. I see those magnets on the side of its body, and I say that those are what they use to channel their powers. And electric, I'm going to say, is still going to work as a friend type. That they float around, they can be kind of hard to manage, they skitter, they stick. But as with the friend type, you can see with Magneton that they're stronger when they're together. They're inseparable. They have those strong bonds. Ah, we have ducks. Everyone's favorite trade Pokemon from Gen 1. Now, Farfetch'd is kind of a nothing Pokemon. It's kind of a duck, a normal duck, holding a normal leek. I think normal flying works just fine. And now we have the Does, Duo and Durio. Now, in the original game, they're both flying normal, but these things don't fly, and I don't think they look very normal. So with Doduo, which is based off of the famously two-headed ostrich, we have to look at some other new typing for it. So looking at its basic traits, 2 heads, fluffy body, big beaks, razor-sharp talons, I'm going to go with steel, because it's got razor-sharp talons and a big beak. Since steel is an offensive type, I think that would work. The other option here is maybe ground, because they're kind of chicks, but they're very big. Like, they're not chicks anymore. Now for Dodrio, this is based off of the 4-headed cassowary, just minus 1 head. Now, I think I want to give it another type, so I'm going to go with fighting. Dodrio is a much more aggressive, territorial. Like, it's fully grown. It's ready to win over a mate aggressively and control territory to protect itself and its flock. Seal and Dugong. They're harp seals. Like, what else do you want me to say about Seal and Dugong? They're happy harp seals. I love them. I would surely hug them and want them, but geez, they're just kind of there. Alright, Grimer and Muck. They are balls of poison. Big balls of poison. They're the most poisony poisons that have ever poisoned. Could they use another type? Maybe. They're big viscous sludge. Maybe you could argue for them for ground. Maybe you could do it for water. But no, these things are poison. Oh, and the clams. Shelder and Cloyster. Now, these evolve with a water stone, and with Shelder being pure water and Cloyster being water ice, this actually fits very well into the way I want to do evolutionary stones. But I don't think that Cloyster is a friend Pokemon. Like, it's a clam. They're not very friendly. I mean, this one has a certain look about it, but that's not intended, I hope. So we're going to get rid of that ice type. Now, there's a few options. We could do steel for, how impressive its giant 2-layered defensive shells are. But we're going to go with rock because rock is the defensive type and shells are defensive weapons. Or rather, they are not weapons at all. And the ghost line. Another trade. So it's going to need to remove one of its two types. Either it's a pure ghost or a pure poison. Considering muck exists, this is the ghost type. It is also the ghost type. It is the ghostiest ghost you've ever seen ghost. And while I don't like to talk about lore, we do sort of have to talk about lore with this, because if this new ghost type is for Pokemon made by humans, we have to explain how humans made Ghastly, Haunters, and Gengars. So for this, we are going to say that they are formed from the emotional bonds formed between Pokemon and trainers. That if the bond is strong enough, either negative or positive, it can result in one of those three Pokemon. If it's a bad emotion, you get evil Gengars. If it's a good emotion, you get positive, friendly Gengars. We've all read Pokemon fan comics about that sort of stuff. So let's move on. Onix. I am so sad that this Pokemon isn't better. It's as strong as a Caterpie. Also has the same sort of look. Drowsy and Hypno. Oh god. Special credit to Bumble McFumbles for really expressing how horrifying these two are. Now, they are pure psychics in the original game. Now, we should add on something else. As a tapir in the first form, and a hypnotist in the second form, fairy could work because it's magic. But we already have a psychic fairy. Normal, since they're in cities because they like to hunt humans. But I don't think that quite fits for these two. So we're going to go with dark. Because what is more evil and shows you're willing to do anything than putting your opponent to sleep and consuming their soul? Krabby and Kingler. Both pure water types. And very unfortunate water types. I really want to love this Pokemon. I do. Ash had one and it was so cool. But, I mean, come on. It's kind of bad at everything. So, we have to give this thing another type than just keeping it as water. Fighting would be good because, it has all that physical attack. It's got that bulk. It's a crab. It goes pinchy pinch. But I think there's something better for it. Now, we could go normal, since it's just a normal crab. But instead for Krabby, I want to go with ground, because it is a small crab. It's still more hiding in the muck. Very opportunist, just trying to get by. But then, when it grows up enough and becomes a Kingler, then it becomes something more powerful. Getting steel because it is no longer feeling the need to hide. Its claw is now big and powerful enough to just crunch up anyone who messes with it. Alright, Voltorb and Electrode. This is a mono-electric type from Gen 1, just like most of the other electrics. Now, as a friend type, does electric work for Electrode? I say yes. because electric is a very skittish type. It's one that takes a while to become one with you. And I think exploding on human contact really says, I'm scared of intimacy. But then it will explode on command if you make friends with it enough. Alright, so these are eggs that are also seeds. Got it. Now, this is a leafstone evolution, so we do need to have a type change. So, for execute, I just don't think it's very psychic-y. I don't know what about 6 eggs says psychic monster. I don't know what about eggs says grass, but they're kind of seeds, so whatever, it's fine. It's fine. I can live with it. So now, executor, we have to ask, is psychic correct for when they evolve into executor? Well, if we're trying to, maybe we could say it's a hive mind. It's not a very smart hive mind. It is a very dumb one, at least according to lore and look. But, I mean, a hive mind is telepathy of a sort. Oh, it's Cubone and Marowak. Aw, look at the little guy. He's so cute. He's wearing his mom's skull as a hat. So he will be staying as ground because he's looking for shelter. He's skittish. He's trying to protect himself, the little guy. And he hides inside of his mother's skull. Now, Marowak is going to have to change typing because it is not more ground than Diglett. God knows it tries. But we have to look at what else it could be. Since the skull has now bonded with its head, we could say it's rock because it is now more defensive. But if the skull's part of it, I don't think that makes it stronger. In fact, that should make it weaker. However, if we're keeping some form of the lore, Ghost works really well here. It could also be a good show that Cubones don't exist naturally in this form. That this is what happens when we poach Cubones. This is the result. They wear their mother's skulls, they become one with it, and they become part ghost type. Alright everybody, it's intermission time. Let's talk about rivals. Now I'm trying to focus only on stats, but the problem is there's only so many type combinations, and with the fact that we aren't changing the base design, a lot of Pokemon look like they can be sharing a type. So, to make things easier on myself and show off a little bit of non-diversity, because if everyone's unique, then nobody's unique, there are going to be pairs of Pokemon that can be allowed to share the same type, as long as they are mutually exclusive. These are Pokemon that would need stat differences to show off their distinctness, but that is okay. It also helps teach the player that not every Pokemon with the same type is the exact same. The Hitmons, Lee and Chan. 2 original generation mono fighting type Pokemon. These 2 bare knuckle fighters are ready to go at each other's throats and prove who is the best at being worse than Machamp. Because honestly, why use these 2 when Machamp exists? Now, adding on a second type will help them both out. Steel could be done because Steel is the aggressive type, but neither really feels like Steel is an appropriate addition for them. I mean, are we going to imply that Hitmonchan's fists are steel? I'm pretty sure they're padded boxing gloves. We could give them a friend type, but I just don't think that we should make them friend energy. Now, normal, however, is an interesting choice because they are clearly prize fighters. These are Pokemon bred for competition. In the same way that we have dog shows where dogs strut their stuff and show off how cool they look, the Pokemon world has dog fights where dogs brutally rip each other apart to show how good they are. Oh, it's Lickitung, everyone's favorite Pokemon. This is normal, apparently. Game Freak decided to make a normal thing be something that just licks everything it sees. Game Freak, what are you doing? Well, what type is it? It's not normal. It learns lick in the original game, so is it a ghost? No, humans would not make this. A fairy, because it's magic? No. Psychic? It is hurting my brain outside of Pokemon, so clearly it's doing psychic damage, but I don't think it's psychic. Dark, because it's licking things and not asking first? No. Dragon, because this thing is fighting me, personally, outside of the computer screen. But no. So we're going to have to use the friend typing. Fire? It's not energetic. Electric? Shy people don't lick other people. Ice? Well, it's slow, it's lumbering, it's with those little legs of it. Its tongue can get stuck to poles. It wants to hug people with its tongue because it's cold. This is a Pokemon that I don't feel great about what type I've given it. But there's not much else. This Pokemon is weird and I don't understand it. Coughing and wheezing, 2 more mono poison types, and they're definitely very poison. Are they as pure poison as Muck and Grimer? No. So we should give them another type. Flying, because they sort of float with their weird gassy bodies? Nah. Fairy, because how is this thing alive? Clearly magic. No. Poisonous gas. That's a dark type thing to do. But I'm going to go instead with rock, since, it's just a floating rock. At least I hope it is a rock. They could be weird flesh bags. If they are weird flesh bags, I think I'd change them to dark. That or change them by removing them from the game entirely, because that is just horrifying. Rhyhorn and Rhydon. The third and final ground rock Pokemon. Now, for Rhyhorn, it's... With rock being the hiding and shelter type, I don't think that it fits anymore with Rhyhorn. I don't just see this thing taking shelter much. So we're going to keep with rock to show that it is very defensive with its shell. It's a very aggressively charging Pokemon, but still just rock. Now with Rhydon, it has gone bipedal. It stood up, it's ready to fight, and it's got a new, bigger horn that for some reason has a different texture than the rest of its body, despite Rhyhorn having the same texture. I'm not sure. I feel like there should be a middle stage between those two, but we can deal with that later. So, for types, we could go with Steel. It's a very aggressive Pokemon, potentially with that new horn of its, but I just think I'd prefer to have it be fighting, to show it's more of a territorial sort of fighting Pokemon. Like, that horn is not really good in a fight with the way it's bipedal. How would you even fight with that? Oh, look at this big, round, pink ball of love. It's an egg. And it has an egg. And also a medical degree. Chansey are pure normal. in the original game. And normal does not describe egg monsters with PhDs. So we're going to have to change that up. What would be interesting here is the fairy type, to show that these are magical healers. It also shows the union that the Pokemon world has between science and magic, with this egg monster using its healing magic alongside the healing machines, which also heal all wounds. It's the two of them working in concert, perfectly together. Humanity and nature. What a wonderful moral. But I also want to give it normal, because it is normal in the context of the Pokemon world to see these things around urban areas, since they are in every Pokemon Center. These are Pokemon that have been bred, presumably by humans, to work as medical professionals. Tangela! I honestly need you to believe me here when I say I have a lot to talk about with Tangela, but nothing has to do with its type. It's grass. That's perfect. Moving on. Kangaskhan. The ultimate proof that you can put more than one Pokemon inside of a single Pokeball. As if Dugtrio and Magneton didn't already prove that. But we should talk about what makes Kangaskhan itself unique. Which, for one thing, is its Joey, and for the second, is its love of its Joey, and its gleeful attitude that it will take to destroying anything that threatens its Joey. Now, normal here for it might seem odd, considering how big and burly this thing is, but I think normal actually works with just a little bit of lore help here. Just the saying that Kangaskhan is a somewhat urban Pokemon, much like a deer on the peripheries of civilization, or a pig / boar in the countryside. These are Pokemon that are somewhat used to roaming around urban areas, or at least nearby them, for easy food. Also, the fact that they know that humans will help them out if they're in trouble. I'm sure that a feral Kangaskhan could probably walk up to a Pokemon Center and the nearby Chansey would still heal it. So, I think I'm going to go with normal here. But pure normal is the rat, so we need a second type. Well, it's sheltering its child, and it's very protective, so I'm going to go with normal. This also increases the bond between it and Marowak. Marowak is also ground, but it's ground ghost. Normal is what happens when natural evolution takes control, which gives us these very docile Pokemon that walk in the streets even though they're huge. Whereas human intervention with Ghost sees us killing them and creating monsters. Horsey and Seadra. I'm going to be honest, I really like Seadra, at least in its aesthetics. I mean, look at it, it's an angry seahorse. I'm personally glad that it got its chance to shine by giving it another evolution, which would give it dragon typing. Unique typing, boom, we're done, except that's a Gen 2 Pokemon. So we need to make Seadra special. And pure water just doesn't work. So we could give it fairy. It's got those cute little fins that look a bit like fairy wings, but it's not very magic. We could give it flying because of those wings, but I don't see it flying anywhere. They're fins. Normal? Seahorses aren't normal things. So this is where we use our friend typing. So this is a fire friend. It's outgoing and energetic. It's ready for adventure. Look at that seahorse. It's ready to fight and die for you. It's floating around. It's ready to fight. It's all for adventure. And now for Goldeen and Seaking. Another pure water type. Oh god, Game Freak, how many pure waters do you want? Now, Goldeen is kinda just a fish. We can keep it as water. So, to make it more interesting, Sea King needs an evolutionary trait. So we could go with fairy because it's very pretty. It is supposed to be a koi fish. But I don't think it's quite pretty enough that it counts as magic. We could make it steel because it's got that big horn. But I just don't think that horn is aggressive enough. It's not that big. So instead, I'm going to go with flying because it has huge fins. And, at least in the game, its signature move is waterfall. And flying up waterfalls is an acrobatic feat. And I think that just makes it a little bit more interesting as the waterfall climbing Pokemon. Staryu and Starmie. Once again, this water type uses a water stone to evolve into a water psychic type. Game Freak can make Pokemon good. The only problem in the base game is, of course, that it is not the only water psychic type. And it is, in many people's opinion, not as good as the other water psychic type. So this one was kind of forgotten with time. Alright, we have Mr. Mime here. It's a fairy psychic Pokemon, which is a type combination we haven't used yet. So it's viable to use, and I want to keep him that. He's psychic because, he's making invisible walls. That seems pretty telekinetic to me. But it's also fairly magical, so fairy also works. And mimes in the real world, they can definitely read minds. I've seen them perform. They knew exactly how to make me laugh. I don't trust them. That's why I have them in my basement. And the next and final rivalry. 2 singular bug types. Now, I know what you're thinking. Why have 2 singular bug types? Well, I think that for bug, it makes sense for them, as a type, to have 2 champions. They're bugs. They swarm things. There's meant to be a lot of them. They're bugs. So, these 2 in the game would have very different builds to show the variety of bug, as it were. 2 incredibly different Pokemon, showing the breadth that bug type could theoretically be. Now, most of that wouldn't pay off until later generations when there's more bugs to have, but for now, this is perfectly viable. Jinx, one of the most heavily censored Pokemon in existence. And also, one of my favorites. Ice Psychic is just a cool type combination. Fortunately, we did already give that to Slowbro, so we need to slightly change things up. Ice, I want to keep, because it is sort of an ice yokai design. But making her mono ice would be strange. So let's change up that psychic type. And if it's a yokai, well, fairy works with the magical elements there. So, ice fairy it is. And another one of my favorites, Electabuzz, the 1-stage champ. It doesn't need anything before it doesn't need anything after it. This guy is ready to fight. So, what type are we going to add to it? Now, we could give it fire type, make it a dual friend type. But, I don't know, it just doesn't seem adventurous to me. It just seems more like it has a house that it defends. But it does have a house that it defends. So that means that fighting does work for this Pokemon. And I'm going to keep it like that. Another 1-stage champ. This guy doesn't need anything more than himself, with his big duck lips and his Charizard tail. Oh boy, is it ready to fight. But I'm not going to make it a fighting type, Because even though that would make it a very interesting comparison to Electabuzz, considering the fact that in-game they kind of are rivals. But, I don't know, Magmar just doesn't look very fighting to me. Poison, though, considering the fact that he's always smoking and letting off, carbon monoxide, Poison actually does work. His signature move in the game, at least what I feel is his personal move, is Smog, poison gas. So him being fire poison is, to me, very cool. Tauros, a big bull with big horns and big tails, 3 of them. They're normal type in Gen 1, and while I'm keeping that normal, we're going to have to add something else for it. Once again, because of the rat's existence. Now, we could give it fighting, because, it charges. It's territorial. It's a bull. But we kind of already have normal fighting, so let's look at some other options. And I'm thinking about steel here, because look at those horns. They're huge. It's got these weird rivets on its head, and its tails look like bundles of wires. It's a very dangerous looking Pokemon. It looks like it has a lot of different weapons it can use to fuck your day up. So I'm going to go with that steel type. And a lot of people are going to hate me for this one, but for Magikarp and Gyarados, I'm going to be doing something very weird. So Magikarp is such a useless fish, I'm going to make it pure normal. I'm not even going to give it water type, because this is such a pathetic fish. It's got no mastery of water. Can it live on land? No, it lives in water. It's just a terrible water type that it doesn't even get the type. But when it evolves, it does not become dragon. I want to keep dragon very rare and special, and I just don't think that Gyarados is rare enough, considering how common Magikarp is. So what else do we make it? Because I don't want to keep it as water flying, because this thing doesn't fly. What is this thing? It's a sea serpent. It doesn't, no wings. It doesn't fly. So we could make it fighting, give it the rage that I feel towards it, but I don't really like that as much. We also already have a water fighting. We could do it electric, because, that bond of electric friend type where it's skittish and angry, but it'll bond with you and become your one true friend. But I don't know, I think it's too angry. Dark could work because it's mercilessly ripping apart its foes with its giant fangs. But instead, I'm going to go with normal. Because for one thing, it shows the connection to Magikarp. But it also shows why people use large ships in the Pokemon world. Because even if only 1 in 1,000 Magikarp become Gyarados, that probably means that the deep ocean is filled with these giant sea serpents that can rip you to shreds. This is why, when you surf, you don't go past a certain point, because the ocean is full of Gyarados. Oh, Lapras, a Pokemon driven nearly to extinction by human action. So am I going to make this a ghost type? Nah. I could make it dragon. It is a rare, prehistoric-looking kind of Pokemon, but it is... I'm just not going to use dragon for it. It's not special enough. Water does work. It's aquatic, but I want to show off more of what's unique about Lapras. Let's go a little bit deeper than just water. Now, what is unique about it is its shell. So we're going to go with rock type to show how defensive it is, that this is a passive Pokemon. It's not looking for a fight. It's just sailing to its own rhythm. And then we give it the ice friend type to show, for one thing, that it is a friend. It is a caring, nice Pokemon. But with rock ice, that makes Lapras into an interesting iceberg Pokemon, which gives it another metaphorical layer. It's like the icebergs and the glaciers that we're slowly destroying in the real world. Oh boy, it's intermission time. Let's look at gimmick Pokemon. Now, for something to be a gimmick Pokemon, that Pokemon needs to have something very unique about it. That means that its strategy isn't one that you can really apply to any other Pokemon. Pokemon like Smeargle with its sketch, Castform with its changing forms in the weather, Delibird with its emphasis on the move present, Dondoza with its partnership with Tatsugiri, Shedinja having 1 HP, or Ice Cube, who needs to be inhaled to keep its ice cube head up. Now, being a gimmick does not mean that a Pokemon is bad or weak. It just means that they need a very different, unique strategy. Now, a gimmick Pokemon in this list can have a conflicting type with others because they fill unique roles. They're not infringing on anyone else's type combinations because they are doing their own unique thing. Ditto. What a gimmick. It transforms into anything. So, really, its basic type doesn't matter. But it's definitely not normal. It shouldn't be normal. If you see goo with eyes and it turns into a perfect copy of you, you would probably call the police and scream a lot. Well, since this is a man-made Pokemon as a failed clone of Mew, we're going to make it a ghost type. Oh boy, another intermission, so soon after the last one. Multiple different evolutionary Pokemon. You see, some Pokemon can evolve into more than one thing. In the first gen, that's only Eevee, and do you want to guess which slide is up next? Now, if a Pokemon can evolve into multiple different types, I don't think it matters if those evolutions conflict with any other Pokemon, because you can pick your evolution based on what you need. You already have a fire type that you like, don't evolve this one into the fire type version of itself. Oh, look at that, it's Eevee. Normal type for Eevee, it's just a cute little dog that humans basically bred into existence. Normal type is perfect for it. A similar deal with the evolutions. I am going to let them keep their type and also gain the normal type to show that these are still domesticated animals. Vaporeon, though, is going to change. With the advent of the friendship type trio, I want Vaporeon to fit into that trio, so turning it from water into ice type. It's not that big of a change, but it will be making problems further on down the type road. Oh, Glaceon, what will I do with you? Oh, and the best Pokemon pet, according to Bumbles McFumbles, is Porygon. This is a gimmick Pokemon that comes out of your computer. Now, while computers are normal things to see in a home, if a file comes out of your computer and uses something called Try Attack on you, you should probably contact your system manufacturer. Since this is a man-made Pokemon, I'm going to give it the ghost typing. And now we get into the fossils. 5 fossil Pokemon split into 3 different lines. Each one was brought back by human science, so each one is going to get the ghost typing. We just have to choose what else do they get. So Omastar is a blue snail, and look, I don't want to go into a Cambrian explosion rant, but it's going to be water type. It's from the Cambrian explosion. Pokemon lived in the water. All animals lived in the... Later. Kabutops. That's a trilobite with huge claws. And it could be a lot of different types. Ground, rock, steel. I'm going to go with rock. Because to me, even though it's got those big claw hands, I feel like it's still a little bit more defensive than offensive in design. Oh, Aerodactyl. my beloved. So this will also be a ghost. Now, we have to look at what else will it be. Ghost dragon would work, but I still think that Aerodactyl isn't rare enough to earn the dragon typing. If this was a video that made the Pokemon rare to catch, then I could see it getting dragon. But for now, no. We're making it flying. Because it has big wings and it flies. Snorlax, one of Game Freak's favorite Pokemon since the first generation. This is just a big, sleepy, fat Pokemon. And you could argue for gimmick status for it. I mean, its whole gimmick is just going to sleep, using moves like Snore and Sleep Talk to fight while asleep and constantly regenning its massive health. But Snorlax is, I think, just too strong for that. I mean, it's so bulky. Now, we could make it a mono-normal, but mono-normal already has the rat. Ghost, since humans throw out a lot of food and it eats that. Oh, fighting, but only when it's awake. A poison, because it's probably eating rotting food, so it smells bad. Its eyes are closed, so maybe it's dark. No, that's... I think I'm going to have to categorize Snorlax as a gimmick, because, what else can this thing be? Oh, an intermission. I think this might be our last one, so savor it while you can. Legendary Pokemon. Now, legendary Pokemon are not going to have to conform to any other limitations, and they do not need to care about any other Pokemon and their typing on this list, because they're late game Pokemon that are meant to be rewards for searching high and low for them. Now, if some other Pokemon happens to have the same typing as a legendary, it sucks to be that Pokemon because the legendary can just be whatever it wants. And the original legendary trio, Articuno, Zapdos, Moltres. Now, to make them a little bit more special and show off their power, I'm removing their flying type and giving them dragon type. If this was a more in-depth video, I might see about giving them a move that would replace dragon with flying, like taking off into the sky. But even with that, we're keeping them as dragon's base. Oh, and now here's the dragons. The Dragoniest dragons. So Dratini is a little bloopy worm, and in the base game it was dragon, but I'm going to make Dratini pure water type. Just slightly hide what Dratini becomes. Dragonair, we can keep that as dragon. Show off the fact that, yes, you are investing into the dragon. And it will be gaining water type to show that it is still a sea dragon. It's still living in the water. Dragonite, though. Dragonite is now pure dragon. Now, it does have wings. It can fly, but I want to have Dragonite be the champion and representative of this type. So, I'm going to keep it as pure dragon. Pokemon 150. Mewtwo. The failed clone of Mew. This is a real powerhouse Pokemon. And it has a lot of baggage from being this mascot of legendary Pokemon, of the legend of Mewtwo. It has movies. It has TV specials. It has action figures. It has unlicensed sex toy paraphernalia. Disconnected from all of that, is Mewtwo really psychic? It doesn't look very psychic to me. In fact, with the way that I'm using ghost type, Mewtwo is man-made, so it's going to be a ghost. And it killed a whole bunch of scientists when it escaped. It burned down the mansion and it hides in a cave, a dark, vengeful god waiting for a chance to strike back at humanity. I'm going to give it the dark type. This also means that outside of story, lore, and design, this does mean that it is an incredibly powerful type combination that it gets to keep. But now here comes Mew. It is the progenitor of all Pokemon, a weird little fetus thing that's also a mouse. And when I think creator of all life, I don't think it's psychic. And if fairy is the magic type, that means that it's a fairy because it magically created a whole bunch of life. But I'm also going to give it the normal type. Now, normal might be odd. Weird flying fetuses aren't normal, but it is the one that creates all life, including humanity in the Pokemon world. So it makes sense that it is the representative of normal life. It is evolution. Because normal is domestication. It's becoming closer together. It also gives me a very strong link to Chansey, which will share its type combination, showing that, in many ways, Chanseys are the eggs that Mew left behind. A final send-off from this god of life. And now let's just do some final thoughts. Dragon type. There are a few Pokemon that could be dragon. There's Rhydon. It's got some very big Godzilla energy, but Rhyhorn's just too common. Lapras could be dragon. It's a hunted, very rare creature. It has that dragon energy. And while we're talking about Pokemon that are being hunted, Team Rocket is hunting Lapras, Cubone, and Slowpoke. Starmie and Staryu have giant gemstones in their chest. Why aren't they hunting those? Gyarados. People always say, make Gyarados a dragon. But I just think that Gyarados is too common. Even as a kid, I was able to get Gyarados. Because, come on, you look at Magikarp and you know it's hiding something. They wouldn't just make such a useless Pokemon. I mean, they did make Unknown, but that was next generation. Next up is Snorlax. Snorlax could be a dragon, but I think it would need a more unique mechanic for it. Something like Morpeko, where you can wake it up or make it angry, and then it turns into a dragon. And then there's Aerodactyl. It is a fossil Pokemon, it's rare, but I don't think it's quite rare enough to make it a dragon. But I am on the fence with it. Now let's talk about the elemental stones. They are a very underused mechanic in later generations, and I think that has to do with how poorly they were used in Gen 1 and Gen 2. In Gen 1, the Moonstones turned the Nidos into part ground. It made them early game Pokemon that were super powerful. But in the lore of the game and in the anime, the Moonstone became tied to Clefairy and Jigglypuff, which were significantly less impressive evolutions, and Pokemon that didn't stand well with the test of time, like the Nidos did. The Waterstone did what I wanted it to do. Shellder gained Ice type, Staryu gained Psychic. Both of those are good additions, but there were other Pokemon that had that same type, with Lapras and Slowbro arguably being better than Starmie and Cloyster. And then Gen 2 introduced the Sunstone, which made Blossom and Sunflora. Now Game Freak just makes unique items for each evolution that would use an item. Applin has 3 different unique evolution items to go into 3 different forms that all share a type combination. Now, we have to ask ourselves, does any of this that I've done help these Pokemon stand out? No. The games were already made. They were made years ago. this is kind of pointless. Game Freak doesn't like to retroactively change types, and they barely ever touch stats. Nowadays, if they want to add new evolutions to a Pokemon line, they make it part of a regional variant. Obstagoon is only for Galarian Linoons and Zigzagoons. The original Hoenn, Zigzagoon, and Linoon line is stuck with Linoon. And to show off this change, there's now the Paradox Pokemon, which, in theory, I really like. I think that they're cool, but they don't have any evolutions at all. They're just there to have high stats and be competitive Pokemon. And I have nothing wrong with competitive Pokemon, but even the Ultra Beast had one Ultra Beast that could evolve. I think Pokemon games should take more from Pokemon Legends Arceus, where they just made a few new Pokemon. They just added on a couple of evolutions to some lines that needed it. Just these smaller generations, with less but more interesting new Pokemon, are much better for the brand. The dex is up to 1,025 unique entries. That doesn't include regional variations that share the same name as their original one. If we throw another 150 onto that pile, it doesn't really mean that much if they're disposable after their generation. Thanks for watching. This is my only video, so clicking my channel does nothing. Please like it, please comment, maybe I'll make another. Maybe I won't. Good luck with me on that. And good luck with you on your day. I'm sorry you listened to this.